Changing your
use
whole
an
way of
ATEM,
thinking
so-
keeps you young, Dave.
That is true, yes. Having to dance differently. Yeah, it's one of the things that I've noticed lately is all these new switchers and things from Rode and now with Panasonic, and there's no separate output for preview. And I guess I'm just old school. It's not necessary, I guess, with the new circuitry. You could just choose it. And multi-view, of course, is a different concept than having separate feeds for all your inputs. And of course, I'm describing a world that has long been submerged by circuitry.
So here you can adjust the program and preview on the ATEM.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Yeah, I have mine set to instead of cut, I think they call it cut bus or whatever, where you just hit the channel and it goes cut, cut, cut. I have mine set to preview, so that I hit the if I want to go from camera 1 to camera 2, I hit camera 2, and then it puts camera 2 in preview, and then I have to hit cut to move it across.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that goes back to the analog days of seeing the shot before you take it.
Exactly.
Director says ready to when you put it up in preview. Yeah.
Exactly. And I find that handy if I'm sharing a screen through my ATEM, just to make sure what I'm about to share is what should actually be shared.
The real thing. Yeah. Yeah.
Tony, for your question, what kind of storage needs do you have?
I have a M1 Mac Mini with 512 that is primarily filled with House of Worship content, and there is I'm having the M1 Mac Mini is actually rebooting on itself, and I'm assuming that it's a storage issue that's causing that. I can't think of any other reason. I had an external drive that I was using with it, and that is almost full. And my new MacBook is actually now half full with House of Worship content as well. So I know I have to do something drastic.
Is it mostly like recordings of your services? So it's like mostly video being saved? Okay.
Yeah, it's video recordings of the services. I had purchased a 2 terabyte from Apple, and I'm not sure if it's the way in which my setup is configured, but when I called Apple and asked about moving some of the content to my Apple paid storage, I didn't get the answers that I needed in terms of using it. I also have, I'm paying for Google storage, 2 terabytes on that as well. And I primarily am moving the content that I'm sharing with the membership.
We do have a volunteer meeting after our show today, about a couple hours afterwards, 11 a.m. Pacific, 1800 Zulu. So if you're interested in volunteering. Hello and welcome to Office Hours. If you're just finding us on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global.
There you're able to participate in the conversation by signing up to be a producer, meaning you get to ask the questions that drive the direction of our show. We have a fantastic show today. Typically, our second hour will focus on a particular topic. Saturday is our education hour, so we look forward to our second part of our hour to go into that topic. Also, today, we also have a way in which you can volunteer, a special volunteer orientation meeting, about a couple hours after the show. So check out the email or Discord if you'd like to volunteer more or help support office hours. But with that, we're going to get into our show. TJ, what do we have?
Thank you, Josh. Up first today, we have Tony Mobley from Newman, Georgia. Tony says, I have a serious storage issue with House of Worship content. No budget. I was thinking of moving storage to SD cards. What is the panel's recommendation?
TJ?
So, Tony, I would say rather than moving your storage to SD cards, I would look into using just plain old hard drives for your long-term storage. They're comparatively inexpensive, way less expensive for the amount of storage you get per dollar. You can pick up what's called an external like an external dual bay hard drive enclosure. And it's kind of like, think of it like a toaster for your hard drives. You can just like plug them in. Some of them are hot swappable. And you just plug the hard drive in and then your Mac will see it. And then you can just offload your long-term storage onto that. And then, label the hard drive as you need it so that, as you collect them and have them floating around your house, okay, this one is, House of Worship this year. This one is House of Worship this year. And then you don't have to worry about it. And, it gives you an opportunity to make 2 copies, keep one locally, give one to a friend somewhere else. And I think you'll be good.
Courtney?
Yep, I concur. It's portable hard drives are available for about, you can get a 5 terabyte for $100. In a USB connector, and so that'll give you 5 terabytes of storage. I don't know how much your storage needs are. I mean, if you're in the, 100 terabyte range, you definitely ought to stay with spinning drives because they will be the cheapest per gigabyte storage out there. Micro SD cards are going up in storage. You can get a micro SD card the size of your fingernail that'll store up to 2 terabytes now. But they get kind of pricey. They're a couple of $100 once you cross the 1 terabyte or even the 500 gigabyte range. They start to get a little pricey, and it's much cheaper to use the spinning drives.
Jeffrey?
And I find that SD cards are not long-term storage. I mean, you can use them as long-term storage, but I always find that they're always switching around, and then you leave one on the table, and then you forget about it. And especially with those micro SD cards, if it falls down from the table into the carpet, the vacuum cleaner just picked it up, you've lost it. It's gone. So the hard drives, SSD drives especially, and hard drives, you can definitely get. You can also get used, refurbished. But get it from a reputable seller, and then make sure that you've done your own wipe off of the hard drive just to make absolutely sure. You can also download that Black Magic app to make sure that it's spinning at the right or writing and reading at the same speeds that it's supposed to be writing and reading at.
TJ?
Yeah, Jeffrey really hit on the point there. It's much less difficult. It's harder to lose one of these than it is to lose an SD card. I've dropped SD cards and they've fallen under the desk and have disappeared for months. And there's not a lot under my desk yet. They just seem to find the little crack that's somewhere and it disappears in there and you're never going to find it again.
I suppose it depends on your definition of lose, as far as whether you lose the storage device or whether you lose the storage itself. Tony, I'm going to go a different route for you. If you don't have enough storage, then I guess that means that you've run out. And if you've run out, that means that you've tried to store more things than you have capacity for. So what you might do, basically this is the age-old, what do you have more of, time or money? So if you have money, then you can buy more storage. If you have more time than money, then you can go through and be a little more frugal about what type of content that you wish to save, which requires a bit of work to be able to sort that out. It's kind of the thing where I didn't have time to write you a short story, so I wrote you a long story, right? So in order to curate the content and figure out what's more important, that does take time. So if budget is the higher priority for you than your time, then I would go through and make sure that you had what you needed saved up and use others. Be more just it's a word that I keep mentioning, discriminating as to what you save. That might be able to help you use the storage you have more usefully. And Dr. Clark, do you have something to add?
It's not so much an addition, but an endorsement of what you just said, Josh. Tony, I'd like you to ask yourself a terrifying question, which is, do you really need to save anything, let alone everything? How likely is it that the content, the recordings of House of Worship services are actually going to be useful in the future or sought out, replayed, and worth the gymnastics that you're going through in deciding how to save everything? Should be between you and your confessor, this conversation.
Fantastic. I'll even chime in another iteration of that. Again, the time entry that you'd want to put into that. What you might do is if you say, oh, there are some little gems in these conversations that I do want to say, well, guess what? That means you've got to take the time, find them, and re-encode them to where you just save the highlight portions, which, again, will take time if you don't have the budget to be able to just save everything. Tony.
Thank you all for your comments, and thank you particularly, Dr. Clark, for your last comment. What's peculiarly interesting about this is that the senior pastor is 93 years old, and part of the reason why I save everything is because every now and then she'll come in with a word or a song, and I definitely want to try to capture those moments because we don't know how long we're going to have those. And so, but thank you all. I will consider everything that's been shared.
All right, let's go to our next question.
Douglas Carmichael is up next. Apple plans to remove Keynote's Keynote Live presentation sharing feature in a future release. Has anyone ever used it? Will you miss it?
John.
I imagine someone somewhere use it sometime, but not me. I've also not used PowerPoint's version of that same feature. From my perspective, I much prefer Apple to spend those engineering resources making something better than trying to replicate the same functions twice, once in FaceTime and then once in Keynote. So I think it's a good thing that they're choosing to identify where that feature best fits and make sure that sharing of Keynotes is done where it best fits.
And John, maybe an explanation for some of us that are at a loss as to what that feature actually provides.
It was basically a way that you could follow along someone else's Keynote presentation, either through the Keynote app or through a website. And so if you had like a cell phone in your pocket, someone could be presenting a Keynote, you could log in to their presentation and watch them progress through the presentation live with screen sharing features in Zoom in particular. And then also you can just email attachments of slide decks. There's really no need for it as far as I can tell.
Okay, thanks for that. Let's go to our next question.
Guy Cochran from Seattle, Washington says, if Blackmagic came out with an NDI, SRT, SDI, HDMI switcher, would it look something like this? And has a link. John?
It's an interesting piece. I'm reading the PDF. It's got SDI and HDMI, and it supports NDI. It's 1080p. And it's funny because the PDF, like Josh and I were talking earlier about, it says actual size. I have a map of the United States, actual size. It says 1 mile equals 1 mile. And my guess is this thing's probably $2,000 plus, and it's too expensive.
That's fantastic. Yes, I was able to check out the picture of it. Looks pretty compelling, and it has a T-bar. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Always got to have the T-bar to it, right? So the first thing I would be concerned about, I love the fact that the keys will change colors more than just red, green. So you can really just kind of get an idea and set up something for yourself. And I'm assuming that's all programmable. I like that Panasonic has an API, and I'm really hoping that they'll apply the API to this, so we'll have a mix effect or a Stream Deck option for this. The NDI you have to pay for. It doesn't come with the unit itself, and then of course you can choose HX or full NDI from there. The fact that it does SRT out is a bonus. I think it's SRT out, not SRT in. The audio is the biggest question. All they're saying in their specifications is an RCA out 3.5 millimeter TRS and a RCA ×2, so a left-right input. So you have a headphones, and you have just a regular TRS. So it's headphones out and then RCA in, but we just don't know what the preamps are going to be inside there or anything like that. And then once again, the price is going to be the big question, but it's an all-in-one. And I think if the price is right, then I will definitely look at it and make a purchase.
Courtney?
Well, Blackmagic did make a unit like this, the television studio, which I have one of. You can get them for $300 now. It has both SDI and HDMI in, and you can use some software to control it. So, you get full software control over that. And it has Ethernet for software control. It does not have NDI, but you could outboard that for an additional couple of $100, since you got to buy it separately, and it's 1/10 the cost of that Panasonic, probably.
You make a compelling argument, Courtney. Let's go to our next question.
Up next is Tony Mobley from Newman, Georgia. I'm having issues with my M1 Mac Mini since today is April 1st. What is the best way to do a spring cleaning for my primary machine?
Jeffrey?
The biggest thing, a lot of people will say just reload the machine, but Apple's been doing this whole thing. If you reload the machine from your username and password, it starts to reload the same programs. And I think that's where a lot of the problems lie. And I'll give you a good example. Adobe Premiere Pro, ever since they bought Frame.io, they have this feature now that if you're using things like Rush or or anything off the iPad, then it will start to transfer that stuff and those cache files down to the computer. So it's easier for you to do the editing, of course, but it can also fill up your hard drive really quick. So I would check on the applications that you have on there. My Mac is meant for only 1 to 2 things, so there's not that many apps on there. But if I was to change it out, I would probably delete all the apps, clean the cache, and then with something like a Clean My Mac or something like that, and then put in the new app and go from there. So that's what I would do.
Courtney?
Yeah, and since it is April 1st, I think what you should do is just take the final step and blow it all away and just install Windows for ARM on it and get rid of all that closed wall garden stuff. April Fools.
Go ahead, Dave.
Well, as a contractor for most of my life, I've had other people's stuff on my computer, and I had to protect it. And I got into the habit of every week I would do a little cleanup. I'd take things off. I'd archive some email. I'd do some shifting of finished products versus ones in development. And I just keep a rotation going. Now, I have 3 external drives for different things that I'm keeping. Family stuff is on one, business stuff on another, and the other is a permanent archive, as described earlier with hard drives. I have a huge capacity hard drive on which I just push things when I'm finished in case I need to bring it back. But on the regular machine that I have, and I use it for almost everything, personal use as well as business, I got into the habit years, maybe decades ago, of doing a routine check, a complete sort of overlook of everything that I have and move things in and out. And yes, I use a lot of USB sticks for storage because I need to offload something or share it with other machines or people. But that's the sort of routine that I got into. And it's about every week that I do a whole sort of look at what I've got on my machine and what needs to be there. It goes along a little bit with your capacity of your machine and how much you're going to expect to be using in the next week. When you're a video editor, you kind of want to work mostly on your machine because it's the fastest access, but then you're also shuffling things in and out. And so if you're going to save anything, keep anything, or things are still pending, then they stay on my machine. But once the project's over, I clear it all out and I go through it. And actually, just this last week, I was going through a consolidation process where I work with a nonprofit organization, and we're obligated to keep all the stuff on their service, not on my machine. So every week I push a few more things off my machine to them, and it keeps me up to date. And it also keeps my machine in top working order. I check the updates and I make sure that all my apps are updated that time, and I make sure that all my systems are ready to go. And if I have pending updates that my apps are telling me we've got a new version, I push it off to that day when I'm going to be consolidating stuff and rearranging all my storage. So in some sense, yeah, if you're keeping your M1 Mac up to date and keeping a look at what the functions are that you're using, generally you can catch these things before they become a problem.
TJ?
If you are installing software and then want to uninstall the software, people say, well, you just delete the app out of the app folder. Yes, but a lot of applications will add other folders and other files, and it'll kind of leave all those things hanging around. I use a program called App Zapper, been using it for like 15 years now. And you basically drag your file from the application folder into that, and it will go search out all the other files that are floating around on your hard drive that are associated with that particular application. And then when you zap the app, it'll clean up all those extracurricular files and whatnot. And then Mickey Makachar in the chat had a great suggestion that I do periodically. If you have, take your computer, disconnect it from everything, take it outside, and blow it out. Use some compressed air and get the dust out of there. That will help help it stay cooler and last longer.
All right, let's go to our next question.
From Adrienne Albach, do speaker cones wear out? And if so, what is the life expectancy across a range of high-performance brands?
Courtney?
Well, it depends. Older speakers, much older speakers, have paper cones on them. Some newer ones do, the cheaper ones do. These days they've moved to a polymer type cone, which lasts a long time, and a rubber type suspension or silicone type suspension for that cone. So that usually will last a long time unless you get them wet, something like that. There are services that can recone speakers, so just use Google to search your neighborhood for speaker rebuilding companies that rebuild speakers, and they will recone them. The other problem you can run into if you hit too much wattage into that speaker, you can actually fry the coils on the back of the speaker, and that requires more major repair work. But yeah, you can get that all done, and most speaker manufacturers will recone them for you. But I would say that I've got speakers here that are 50 years old and still working fine. So as long as you keep them out of the elements, and they have paper cones in them, as long as you keep them out of the elements, don't have cats who like to mark their territory on your speakers, you should be okay for, at least half a century.
TJ?
I had a cat that did that, yes. Unfortunately, like Courtney said, the cones don't tend to wear out. It's the foam or the rubber around the edge of the speaker cone that I find that will, because it's a mechanical device, and that movement of the speaker cone moving in and out causes the foam around the edge of the speaker or the rubber to flex a lot. And depending on how much usage, that's where you can start to get some wearing out. And like Courtney said, there are places that will, refoam your speakers for you. I would never try that myself.
Dave?
Yeah, I go with both of those guys, and I've had the same thing. I've got 50-year-old speakers. I've had to replace the base cones twice now, and it is the same thing. It's the deterioration of the materials. And unfortunately, I live in a place that's very low humidity, and so the moisture that would normally keep things flexible is missing. And the speaker cabinet itself can actually crack, and the wood can become brittle. So those are the things you have to watch out for with any mechanical process. But yeah, they do wear out. They should last a very long time, but in some environments and circumstances, a lot of things can happen to the mechanism. Those two that I have had replaced, they still sound great, and I think it's more a case of my love for the speaker and its sound. I'll make sure that I always get the replacement tones whenever they wear out.
Wonderful contributions. Also, Mickey in our chat notes that it does depend on how you drive them. If you take care of them and not overdrive your speakers, they should last for a long time. Let's go to our next question.
From Andy Krokendorfer in Viera, Florida. A new version of Zoom ISO was released yesterday. Any notable updates?
Jeffrey, did you get a chance to check it out?
Oh yeah, there's a couple of new notable, very important ones. First of all, they upgraded the Zoom Meeting SDK to version 5.14.0, so it's closer to Zoom, so they can be used hand in hand without any problem. The other thing is the biggest problem that I always had with Zoom ISO was every time I tried to log in with the new version, every time I tried to log in, it would not remember username password. Now it will switch over to the default, the default browser, and so you can store in your username and password from there, and then you'll be able to log in a lot easier into your Zoom ISO, which is great. They've also added some OSC commands, and of course OSC also got an update as well with a lot of stuff, but Zoom ISO is where I normally play. But yeah, they added a whole bunch of new commands from OSC and a couple other things. NDI has been at 5.5 since 2.0.4, so nothing's changed there. Other than that, I think that's the big ones.
Fantastic. And typically there's a stability update as well, so it sounds like it's something we should check out. Let's go to our next question.
From Paul Walhus in Austin, Texas. Zoom is expanding its Zoom IQ Assistant to give AI-powered summaries and ask further questions when you join a meeting midway. As the meeting ends, the bot posts a summary and does a lot more AI stuff. Comment, please, on Zoom getting AI.
John?
And the arms race continues. So Microsoft made an announcement that they're adding all these same features into Teams about a month ago or so, 3 weeks. And so Zoom's trying to catch up, and AI is going everywhere. It's going to be integrated into everything. It's been integrated into a lot of stuff in the past, but now with transformers and these large language models and the hardware finally catching up, hence the explosion of AI. But you're going to see it. You're going to see it integrated everywhere.
Exciting times. And our meeting will be exciting as well, producers, if you vote on our questions. Making sure that we have the most highest voted questions is the ones that we handle first and do spend the most time on. Feel free to submit your questions as well. You can go to officehours.global to find out how to do that. And feel free to submit questions for both the first hour and also for our second hour topic. We have a fascinating educational topic here about parents' involvement in education. So feel free to preload those questions now. Let's go to our next question.
Yeah, from some guy named TJ Asher in Minneapolis, Minnesota. First, Apple announced the 2023 Worldwide Developers Conference will be an online digital-only event. Now E3 has been canceled. What does this say about the future of in-person events, considering that NAB is moving forward with an in-person event?
Jeffrey, would you like to make some prognostications?
Well, the biggest with E3, they haven't had a show for the last 2-3 years now, and so with that, from what I've read, I think there's a little bit of weird management on there. The biggest problem is everybody's trying to stuff in their conference between now and September, and we're saying, like for instance, I'm going in 2 weeks. I'm going to go to Anaheim for NAM, National Association of Music Merchants, and then I'm going to go straight to NAB from there because there is a little bit of overlap, and there's a lot of conferences that are doing that. So we're talking, I think it was June 13th and 14th on the E3 conference. So I really think that they're just trying to reorganize something that they haven't had started back up and made it a little bit tougher. So they probably just decided, okay, let's ditch this all together and get to our core beliefs, and then maybe a few years down the road we'll start this back up again. As for Apple, they've been very successful with creating their events virtually to begin with, and having a whole bunch of people sitting in a theater watching a big screen instead of watching people on stage is something that I wouldn't want to do. But being able to hold on to the products that they're talking about, that is something that I want to do. So that'd be something that's definitely missed.
Courtney.
Yeah, the city of Los Angeles is going to miss E3. It used to bring in about $88 million for that convention. And they decided, I think, on E3 that post-COVID there weren't as many people. Sorry, Josh, you're unmuted. They weren't as many people interested in traveling, even though COVID is, I think LA is now officially no longer in COVID emergency health status, or whatever they call it, that prevents, all the restrictions are now removed in Los Angeles for meetings. They still decided that there weren't enough games that were in development that were in a state of ready to show or ready to market. So they kind of pulled the plug, and they even pulled the plug on the virtual version of it. So there won't even be an online version of the E3 event. And I just looked at the NAB convention floor plan, and I've been going to NAB for years. And last time I went was right before COVID, in 2019, I think, before they canceled it. And I looked at the floor plan, and it's probably about 50% of the floor space of the pre-COVID floor plan for NAB. So I don't think even NAB, which is back to a live convention, is going to be, it's just going to be kind of a shadow of its former self. You won't have near the South Hall is not going to be open at all, and that has twice the floor space of the other halls. So, even the new West Hall, which they've moved into, is only about half full. So it's only taken about half the floor space. So I think we'll see how well it goes with NAB for opening up this convention, and I think the LA Convention Center may decide to whether or not they're going to continue with that after they see the results of the convention this year.
Go ahead, TJ.
I wonder whether the ability of a company that has a large enough potential customer draw, let's say like Blackmagic or Apple or Microsoft or some of the FANG or whatever they call that group, they have their big events and sort of have enough draw, I think, to just say, hey, we're going to have an online event. I know Blackmagic does that on occasion. They say, hey, and then you get Grant up there doing his demo thing, in their studio that they have, and he's sort of in a nice controlled environment and gets to do the demo that he likes to do. But they don't have to go anywhere to do that. So the cost to them, I wonder what the cost, the ROI and that type of thing. If, okay, we're going to, flying from Australia to the US and setting up a booth at NAB and, all the logistics and everything involved there, whether that pans out financially for a lot of companies. The smaller companies, I think, are the ones that would probably end up benefiting most from an in-person event where they don't have that big sort of built-in reach, as it were. And, so it's like, oh, you don't get that opportunity to sort of walk by and go, hey, that's kind of a neat thing. And there's a small company with only a few people working there. It's like, wow, that's some incredibly innovative stuff happening here. Let's get that information out. I think that's where office hours might have a role in that down the road, where we can kind of be looking out for the interesting thing and say, hey, you're interesting. Come on into office hours. We'll kind of, get you exposed out to the world, perhaps.
John?
I think what we're seeing is the beginning of the end for in-person events. And what it looks like is in-person no longer being the default. And for all time up until now, because technology wasn't there to make it possible, everything worked best in person. And now there are just certain aspects of events that you don't need to be in person for. And really the only reasons to be in person is if you want to be hands-on with something and actually touch something you're looking at, like NAB provides. And then the social aspects of events can all be done virtually, and the educational aspects of events can all be done virtually. So Apple's a software product. It doesn't need people in person for them to benefit from the content of their in-person events. The only thing it provided really was the social aspect. So if Apple can provide that and a higher quality of the content virtually, then they should.
John.
Yeah, so NVIDIA had GTC 2 weeks ago now, and by the way, they just passed Berkshire Hathaway. They're the 6th largest company on the planet. And 2019, they had 9,000 people show up at their physical conference, and this last conference was completely virtual. They had 250,000 people attend. So a little bit of foreshadowing there.
Fantastic. Let's go to our next question.
From Tony Mobley in Newman, Georgia. Tony says, I'm using a gaming mouse, and it seems to be overly sensitive. What is the panel's recommendation for a mouse to use in their setup?
TJ?
I am a firm believer of a wired mouse, and I have been using a Logitech M500 for 5-6 years now. Love it. Won't trade it for anything else.
Jeffrey?
You will not have to switch out mice to get it to work a little bit better. So what's happening is you have inside of a mouse, you have what's called the DPI, dots per inch, I believe is the acronym. And what that means is how fast you can get from point A to point B. Gamers love to have the high end, so they can have, well, it really depends on how they game. But if you want to have more a more accurate move as opposed to a fast move, you can change out the DPI by going into the mouse settings and just say slow down the mouse. So I would try that first before you go buying any other mouse. But if you do get one, check out some of them that have some great ergonomic features to them, like Contour has a great ergonomic mouse that you can give a try.
Samuel?
Yeah, I use the Logitech M185. I have quite a few of them, and it's been working very well for me. I've been using them the last few years, and the battery probably lasts 2 years.
That looks like a very compact one, Samuel. Samuel, I believe that's the first time you've commented here for our panel. Welcome. Happy to have you. What type of things have brought you to office hours?
Well, I've been doing live streaming since 2016, and I use vMix a lot and Bitfocus Companion.
Fantastic. Well, great to have you. And go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, if a lot of the gaming mice are like this Logitech mouse, even has a way to switch DPIs on the fly. So it has this little button here. It's clicky, and that changes the DPI for the mouse, so it changes the speed of it as you move it. Moves further, faster, depending upon the 3 different. I think it's 3 or 4 different settings. When you click it, it cycles through the different settings of the DPIs. So if it's a gaming mouse, check. See if it has a button on it for switching that, or it may be a key combination with a click of the mouse wheel or something like that changes the DPI of the mouse.
Tony, what do you think about our recommendations?
Thank you all so much. It does actually have a DPI button, Courtney. So thank you. I hadn't even noticed it until you just said it. Thank you.
Fantastic. Let's go to our next question.
From Paul Walhus in Austin, Texas. Paul says, why will Amazon no longer generate CSV reports of your purchases? The only way to do this is with a third-party browser plugin.
Jeffrey?
So on March 20th of this year, they actually removed the CSV download option from your reports if you go to your orders page. And they did not get rid of it completely. So I put in a link in Mukana that you can go and click and say to get your actual CSV report. It's now going to be a, hey, I need to ask for it, so I'll get it type report. I have a feeling that that's so they can get the misclicks and things like that. So people just clicking on it randomly. But the interesting thing to note, it's only in the United States. All the other Amazons, if you go to their downloader reports, if you're outside the United States, you still have a CSV report. So if it is very, very important then it'll come back. But right now, I think they're just testing it because, they got to figure out how to work on a more skeleton crew since they keep losing jobs left and right.
Let's go to our next question.
From Adrian Albeck from Brisbane, Queensland, Australia. I'm building a 5.1 mix room, but I can't find many 5-channel amps. Most subwoofers are self-powered. Who makes a 5-channel amp these days?
Courtney?
Well, all the consumer amplifiers, the AVRs, Yamaha, Onkyo, check there, but they don't have discrete 5 inputs to 5 outputs. They all have 5 amps in them, and if you look on the back of them, they have. Here, I can bring up one. Here's the back of a Yamaha. It has 5 amplifiers. You get front, left, right, rear, left, right, and a subwoofer channel. So you do have 5.1, and it does 5.1 Dolby decoding into it. So you could hit it with the encoded Dolby 5.1. But if in your studio you've had 5 discrete channels that you want 5 outputs for, I don't think it will accommodate that for you without encoding it to 5.1 first. Of course, there are Genelec or studio speakers that have or self-amplified speakers, which are quite good and quite expensive, and that's how most studios are going these days, to amplified speakers in one package. So that's a solution, or get you a consumer type AVR from Onkyo or Yamaha, or there's a number of others that will decode the 5.1 and output it to your 5 speakers.
All right. Fantastic. Mickey mentions in our chat that there are 8-channel amplifiers from the likes of Yamaha, as Courtney mentioned, and also Crown. And most two-channel amps, mostly the 2-channel amps, they run 2 channels for each monitor. So check out those brands. All right, let's go to our next question.
From Douglas Carmichael. Douglas says, Jeffrey, you mentioned Clean My Mac as a useful maintenance tool. Would you know of a perpetually licensed alternative? After the Waves debacle, I'm not a fan of subscriptions for software.
John?
Be super, super careful choosing other alternatives. I remember there was a Clean My Mac competitor probably 10 years ago that was just installing spyware on people's computers. So it would clean out some stuff and add some extra stuff you didn't want. So just be careful. There's one I know called Mac Pilot, which is by Coingo Software, and it's not the same features, but it does automate some of the terminal commands that you can do. So that's potentially something. Clean My Mac is also part of the SetApp subscription. I know you said you don't like subscriptions, but at least with SetApp, it's $10 a month and you get several dozens of applications included in that. So that might be worth looking into.
Jeffrey?
Yeah, and with subscriptions in this case is Apple's continually updating and changing all the settings and securities for apps. So what will work today might not work tomorrow on Apple. So a subscription like that is basically so a company like Clean My Mac can actually keep updating the software to keep up with what Apple's asking these apps to do in the back end. And I think that it's very important. And as John said, I remember how many pages or websites you'd go to, and you'd try, especially if you're trying to download some other software, and then they'd have this big green button that says download now, and it's not even the software that you were looking for. And then of course, next thing you know, you have something that you don't want on your machine with malware. And I just don't want to go back to that. I personally don't have Clean My Mac on my Apples anymore, or any software like that. I'll do some manual cleaning and cache release if I need to.
Go ahead, TJ.
Yeah, I agree with both John and Jeffrey. Whatever software you get, try to make sure it's from a reputable software developer. And unfortunately, Douglas, that Pandora's box has been opened, and I think eventually every bit of software is going to end up with some sort of subscription down the road.
And Dave?
Well, way back when macOS 10 first came out, it was mostly BSD Unix based, and there used to be a lot of crons, things that would run to do maintenance on your system. And a company called Maintain out of Sweden created a thing called Mac OS X Cocktail. And it's a compendium of features that you can clean up on your Mac. Everything from how your Finder layout is, whether you have hidden files showing or not, any of the parameters for security. And it also does a full clean out of caches and stored material in your browsers and things that are just detritus that accumulates as you use many of your pieces of software. So it has a automatic weekly scheduled running if you want to do it that way, or you can manually invoke it every time you think you need your machine's operating a little differently and maybe you want to do a check. I've been using it for almost 20 years now, and they stay right up to date. They're one of the people who get demo versions of new systems and updates, and they keep up to date with Mac really well.
So hopefully some good solutions for you there, Douglas. And for our rest of our producers, don't forget to vote on the questions that we have in the comments and in our chat. No, you want to vote on the questions, what you want to vote on. And feel free also to put in any questions for our educational hour. Later, we have our parent involvement topic. So feel free to preload those questions. And we also have general educations as well as media and virtual production questions that you can ask here in the first hour. We like to just stick to our second hour topic on the education topics for our second hour. So let's go to our next question.
From Tony Mobley in Newman, Georgia. My M1 iPad Pro has 943 gigs free. Should I consider moving content to the iPad? If not, what is the best use of all this free storage?
Courtney?
Well, the best use for all that free storage on your iPad is to capture video with your iPad and put it in that storage on the iPad. I would not use the iPad for general storage because of the difficulty of getting files on and off the iPad, and it's not necessarily accessible to people that don't live in the Apple universe. I would suggest, if you have a Gmail account, look with Google Drive for you can get a cloud storage. You can get 2 terabytes for $100 a year. And that Google Drive is then accessible by anybody with any type of phone or tablet or computer. And it's pretty secure. You can easily select a file on it and send out a link to that to anybody, and then they will have access to that file without having to worry about file transfer protocols and the limitations on the size of files you can attach to emails and how to get files back and forth between machines. It's pretty seamless. You just drag your files and drop it onto the Google Drive, and it uploads it over your internet. So I'd look at that. Cloud storage is a possibility, and at $100 a year for 2 terabytes, it's very handy.
Go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, I was just thinking, it's a terabyte drive and I'm using very little of it. So I was just wanting to create opportunities to maximize the use because it's just sitting in my setup right now and I'm not doing anything with it other than, using it as a separate screen.
Sounds like you have a bit of a conundrum. You've got all types of space on your iPad and not enough on your storage drive. So I don't know if a reconciliation might help. I have a similar situation. I have a terabyte iPad Pro, and unlike some of the other iPads with headphone jacks, not that I'm better, it has a USB-C port. So a little easier to get things on and off that than any iPhone, really. Not that I'm better. Go ahead, TJ.
I also have an iPad that has a lot of extra storage, if you will, and I've never used it as a temporary hold bucket. Maybe you could do that if you had to, just for briefly, migrate a file over there that you need, if you were swapping around, back to your early question about kind of running low on storage space. I think basically maybe consider, what are you doing with all those files? Are you editing them or whatnot? Maybe look at moving them over to the iPad and doing some editing on the iPad when you're kind of sitting around at the park or something, have a little time and do some editing there. And then that would allow you to kind of kill 2 birds with one stone, so to speak. You could use some of that available storage and power on that iPad, consolidate down some of the files you have from the house of worship, so you can trim and whatnot, and kind of clean some of that up to help get you some of that storage space back.
Go ahead, Dr. Clark.
What TJ said was what I was going to say, but he said it better.
Nice. All right, let's go to our next question.
John Prado in Las Vegas, Nevada says, I've been reviewing Adobe Firefly for a few days now. I have a report.
John, can you fill us in?
This is interesting. Adobe had to put something out there because they were getting clobbered by Stable Diffusion and Midjourney. And Midjourney now has 14.4 million members on Discord. And right now there's 1.4 million people online on Discord playing with Midjourney. And what's available on Firefly is text to image and text effects, which are quite underwhelming. And then they have a whole section called "We're exploring these kind of things," all kinds of different features that will eventually end up in Illustrator and Photoshop. So they're battling from behind, and because they've chosen to do a copyright version of their model's way smaller than what Midjourney and Stable Diffusion has. And so this is going to be an interesting battle moving forward.
Interesting. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, in a similar conversation, you can now use Bing. It's bing.com/create, and you can experiment with the DALL-E 2 engine through Bing's service. And they have a really interesting model where you get a certain number of accelerated searches per month. I think it's like 20. And it uses them up, and then you can do the slow searches similar to Midjourney. It doesn't cost anything right now. But what's really fascinating is you can earn more credits for those faster searches by using Bing. So it's incentivizing users to switch their web search. And so now I'm actually in Bing more often than I am in Google when I'm on my work PC, so that I can get images generated.
That just makes me chuckle. Yeah. So it is a compelling offer, but for years they'd have the little like bonus points, hey, you're using Bing, like gamify things, but now they actually have a value add to it. So well done, Microsoft. Courtney.
Yeah, I recently saw a demo of the Bing search in the Edge browser, the Edge integration of the AI tools. And it's quite amazing now. They've built it in. They've added a lot of granularity to the search. You can say, just search this web page, or search this topic, or give me a result based on, a file, and you can point it to a PDF file. It can search through that PDF file and summarize things, and it can generate images based on all of that stuff too. So it has come a long way. I was going to ask John if he could show us a sample of its text-to-image work on Firefly, and so we could see how it compares to Midjourney.
I can't show anything. I've done several, and they remind me of DALL-E, early version of DALL-E from last summer is what they remind me of.
Where faces look very much like a Picasso painting. Yeah, yes. Three noses thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like we're sort of treading this line too between how much of the copyright is going to be an issue with this, because there's no precedent set. So it seems like the different companies are sort of staking their claim on it, and there's some apprehension in some, but at the same time, every company feels like if they don't at least get something out, they're going to be passed up. So it's an interesting situation. I guess we'll have to wait and see how the complexities of these happen. But it's a strange new world. Let's go to our next question.
From Paul Wahus in Austin, Texas. Paul says, what is a generative adversarial network, also known as a GAN?
Go ahead, John.
I can't believe Paul got this question through. Last time it was there, it had like -7 on it or something. The haters are not paying attention today. I think this is outside the scope of office hours, but it's basically a comparative network. And I have a perfect example of what a GAN is. Hot dog or not hot dog?
All right. Next question.
From TJ Asher in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I heard that Midjourney has shut down the free access because the free users were using so many resources the paid users could not get access. Is this true? How do we get to see if we want to pay for these tools?
Jeffrey?
So it looks like the Washington Post reported something where Midjourney was getting abused, and of course a lot of fake news was coming out of it. So that's one of the reasons why Midjourney decided to shut down the free service. So you gotta thank all the people that decided to use this for their own gain instead of thinking of the greater good. To use, I don't know. I mean, there's enough examples out there of Midjourney art that, and a lot of places like their Discord, like their like the Facebook groups, the Reddit groups, all that, where you're going to see tons of examples. And so yeah, and I'm guessing that you'll be able to at least pay for the month and then get out of it if you don't want to pay for it. But that's the reason why that they've decided to shut down, at least for now, the free side of Midjourney.
TJ.
Yeah, I had read a Forbes article that mentioned that the people were using bots to try to sign up for free accounts to generate images so they'd get their free, you get like half a dozen or a dozen free images for any new account. And so the CEO commented that people were using some sort of trick that they had learned to sign up for free accounts rapidly and grind through a lot of images, and it was causing issues for the paid users. So that's what I read on the Forbes article.
Courtney?
Yeah, there's always problems with gaming the system. If there's something that is worth something, people will figure out how to game it. And if you're looking for some place to see what the quality of Midjourney can do, there's their community showcase, which is just a fabulous collection, and it changes daily, of a lot of the images that people are creating. And as you hover your mouse over each one, it shows you part of or most of what the prompt was that was used to create that image. So just do a Google search for a Midjourney showcase, and you can sort it by most recent or most popular or most so on. And it's quite a selection of amazing pictures.
TJ, something to add?
Yeah, just speaking of Midjourney here, I've noticed with the new version 5 that the results I was getting before with particular prompts would give me, I'm kind of looking for a more artistic thing when I'm doing stuff in Midjourney, and getting more like photo type stuff as opposed to the artistic thing. I'm just curious if anybody else had seen anything like that.
John?
Yeah, you have to be more explicit on your prompts, and that's what David Holtz, the CEO, was articulating in the launch. Was more articulate is better on version 5. So if anybody wants to have access to Midjourney and play around with it, just send me a message in Discord, and I've got the bot set up in our Garage Rocketeers site, Midjourney channel inside of there, and you can go to town and play with Midjourney.
All right, let's go to our next question.
From Bob Sturdivant from San Antonio, Texas. In the celebration of April Fool's Day, what are some of the pranks that have happened on studio sets or done with the use of technology?
Samuel?
Well, I just saw this week that there was a Dutch website that played a prank, that they made a Sony camera for left-handers, the A7L5 instead of the A7R5.
Oh man, that was a prank. Dr. Clark?
10 years ago, back in the days of early iPhones, my grandson, who lived with us at the time, he was probably 10 years old or 11 years old at the time, overnight changed the language in each of our iPhones while we were sleeping. And when I got up on April 1st, my interface was in Chinese and my wife's was in Japanese. And of course, we had to figure out how to use settings, which was also in Russian or Chinese or Japanese, in order to reset the language to English.
Tales of woe. Study that settings menu right now. Next, go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, back in the late 80s, I worked in community access television, and we had a morning show called Coffee Break on Friday mornings. It was live, and we had a senior tech in the company who was really into April Fools, and every year he would come up with a very complicated but amusing effect. And we all came to the office one morning to find everything was upside down. That is, all of the signals out of our cameras and that were upside down. The other one was doing a fake interactive television demonstration. And we got our host to get involved with this, where we gave him 5 or 6 addresses to read out, and the cable company was testing the system, and we were going to show you some of the test results. And we had shot beforehand, put a camera down low in a living room and have people just walk around or play with their dog or read the newspaper or something. And we had 5 or 6 of these clips ready to play out. And then he would sit on set and say, well, here at 6258, we're looking at, oh, that looks like a woman who's just, knitting. Oh, that's very interesting. And then after that, we had not warned the cable company that we were going to do this. We just, do these pranks. And the phones lit up. And we got into big trouble because they had to deal with all kinds of people who were suggesting it was outrageous and illegal and everything else, that they were in our living room and the TV. And some woman actually got in trouble because she put a blanket over her TV and it overheated, and now her TV was not working. And we created chaos that day. And we all learned our lesson. But those things used to be mischievous pranks, and now we don't see too many of them because they're now considered, dangerous.
John Preto?
We were techno nerds, so we did all kinds of fun stuff on April Fools. My favorite one was on Windows. You could take a snapshot of somebody's desktop and create that as a background, and then get rid of everything else. And so when users would come to try to log in, everything was frozen. It was hilarious to see people.
Courtney?
Yeah, I remember back in the early days of semiconductors that Intel, I think it was Intel, put out a April 1st tech update release that they are coming out with a new chip. It was write-only RAM. So you could write to it, but you could never read it back out. So that was, and they had a spec sheet and everything for it. But these days, technology is moving so fast, it's hard to put up something that wouldn't be interpreted as true, or it's hard to tell the true stuff from the April Fool's stuff, these days.
Yeah, I wonder what our AI components would say if you asked it to engineer such a task. Let's go to our next question.
Tony Mobley from Newman, Georgia. I'm running the iPhone XS Max with the Shoot app Pro for 7 consecutive days for 24 hours. This is a first. What does the panel think? Still looks pretty good to me.
So, Tony, has it run pretty solid for you?
Yes, it's running great. I think this was really not something I had planned to do. I was just waiting for it to fail, and it hadn't failed, and so that's a great thing.
What's your pipeline, Tony? How are you bringing that into your production?
The XS Max is in the back of a teleprompter, and it is connected through an Apple adapter. I have a Lightning connector connecting the adapter and an HDMI that is going into my ATEM Mini Pro. It is in camera 1 on the ATEM Mini Pro. And I'm using the Shoot app to control everything.
All right. Well, keep us posted, Tony. Let's go to our next question.
Our final question for the first hour, Gordon Lake from Los Angeles, California. Are there brands that Office Hours panelists have unshakable loyalty to, or is it always the best product wins?
And by the way, we can do a later follow-up after our original questions to see how unshakable this is. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Unshakable, no. But on the same aspect, no, not on best product either. And I'll give you a couple examples here. I'm a big fan of Sony cameras, and I use a lot of different versions of Sony cameras. I will also look for cameras that have Sony sensors inside because I know what their limitations are. buying a best product to win. I don't do. I always look at the specs. I always look at how it's going to be available, if I'll be able to buy it again in a couple of years if I need to. I'll always look at the company itself. A lot of Amazon companies are popping up with the same products, and I learned that's basically because a lot of licenses for products are up. And so what happens is they then just ship everything out, the same cases and the same looks to other companies. And all of a sudden they start making these clones, which are perfectly legal. But I wouldn't buy, like, for instance, a PTZ clone. You see a ton of them on Amazon. I wouldn't buy a PTZ clone simply because of the fact it has SDI and HDMI and all that other stuff. I want to know what type of sensor it has inside. I want to know what type of software. I want to know what type of support I'm going to get on that. So a lot of times I go to the unshakable loyalty simply because of the fact that I know what they're going to offer me. But if I find that there's a better product out there, I will definitely give it a once over, and if I will buy it if need be. But it'll be a little bit harder to do, but it's not impossible.
Go ahead, Dave.
Well, on the hardware scale, I'm apparently very loyal to Panasonic. I've shot with Panasonic cameras since I started shooting video. So Panasonic on that score. But on the software side, I am a huge fan of and a completely loyal and paid up person. And they don't do subscriptions. So that's another thing. Omni Software have a suite of products that are really, really useful. And I've used them for as long as Omni's been around. And should they be subsumed by some other company, well, then maybe my loyalty would be tested.
Courtney?
I'm being a frugal shopper. I tend to not have very much brand loyalty because I like to look for what works and solves the problem and gets the job done for the best price. And remember the B-Link by Courtney? Everybody remember that? Well, I've now switched over to using Melee, so no longer B-Link by Courtney, now Melee by Courtney. the for small mini PCs. So I usually look at what's available, and if it does the job and it's not overpriced, then I'll go for it, which is why I have a few Apple products out there. I don't use them that much, and I'm not a Apple fanboy because they don't make too much stuff that is economically priced, let's say.
But Melee by Courtney doesn't quite roll off the tongue. So, yeah, I don't know. I guess they didn't attract your attention. Well, thank you, our producers and panel, for our first hour topic. We're going to be moving directly to our second hour education topic. Just a note before we do that there will be a volunteer orientation meeting a couple hours after our show today. So if you'd like to help out, or you're interested in finding ways in which you can support office hours and the production and the volunteers behind the scene, check that out in the email and in our Discord. With that, we'll turn things over to Dave to head into our education hour.
Thank you, Josh. Today we're looking at the involvement of parents in people's educational lives. This probably at first has an emphasis on school, because parents and schools are interacting all the time. But it also can involve parents as a support for people who are being trained in different sessions and sort of environments. So I thought I'd break the ice with a couple of stories, and you can think up your own stories as well involving parents and maybe your interactions with them. You join in by raising your hand on the panelist question, and we'll go to those as we go through. My first story comes to me as it's a true story. It sounds weird, but it's a true story. It was told to me by my wife, who heard it directly from the person who had experienced this. And they were discussing, because they both worked in a small college, how helicopter parents are always involved in the choices students are making, and how they, at the beginning of any open house or whatever, the student is reluctantly drawn around this whole thing to see what kind of options they have at a college. And sometimes they don't even want to go to that college, but the parent, insists. Well, the big story that came out of that was that a fellow who was working as a heavy equipment operator on a construction site had done something unfortunate, and his supervisor reamed him out about it and gave him what for. And through that natural process of family, the young man who was the heavy equipment operator related this yelling episode at work to his mother, who then showed up at the construction site the next day to talk to the supervisor and be very angry with him that he was treating her son so badly and that he should stop doing this. And the supervisor simply sat in his office with her, listened to her whole complaint, and smiled and nodded and said, okay, well, thank you very much for your input. And she picked up her stuff and left, and he then called the fellow in and fired him. So that was the first parent intervention that resulted in you've gone a little too far if your mother's coming to the workplace and advocating for you. The next one actually is a little more involved, but it's part of what I learned about the role school administrators play in dealing with parents, and as well some aspects of how teachers have to respond to parents. I was the video producer for an interactive course on principalship. This is training people to move up the line from teacher to becoming principals. And this course was a 5-week course, but it was an interactive course. So each cubicle had a computer, it had a video playout, and then it had a phone and file folders for paperwork. And the course was 2.5 hours of intense work at the cubicle with a 30-minute roundtable with everyone in a circle talking about their experience. And this went for 5 weeks, 1 day each week. So the programming was to be introduced to choices that principals have to make. And then you get a selection of options. Each sort of challenge is sent to you, and you have 4. It's like a multiple choice question. And then you choose one of the outcomes that you like, and then you get to see what would happen if you made that decision, because we shot every option. So this is a branching interactive system. It's a very complicated script, but it was fun to make. I was also asked to document one of these sessions so that they could have a record of how this thing works, and I had to show people at workstations and all that stuff. As part of this little interactive environment, there was a telephone. So each workstation had a phone. And they had hired grad students to sit in another part of the building and call these workstations and be an angry or upset parent. And they had a script they were following, so that was fine. They also had a stopwatch. And the stopwatch was meant to keep the person on the phone as long as possible. And the job of the student learning to be a principal was to how to deal with someone who was clearly upset or very concerned about something, and get off the phone as quick as they could. They weren't aware this was the objective, but over the 5 weeks, they did learn expert skills on how to handle phone calls from parents. And this was where, in the circle, people would share that every time I've had to do that, I use this strategy, and they'd share that. And then the next week, when they got a phone call, they were actually a little better handling it. And after 5 weeks, most of them had developed the skills of handling these phone calls. And it occurred to me that it is a skill that a teacher has to develop in terms of de-escalation and dealing with people's emotions, or hearing their whole story, or understanding the student better through their parent and that sort of stuff. And it was, for me, enlightening, because I was not yet a parent at this point in my life, and I didn't have any kind of experience like that. My parents' involvement with my schooling, and I was one of 7 children, so I didn't get a lot of attention. Anything at school that was a problem with my dad, and he would have to go down and explain or deal with. But he was a good guy in that regard. He understood teachers had a tough job, and he didn't make their life difficult. He made mine. So I guess, just as a way of starting this off, just with a couple of anecdotes about how teachers have to interact with parents, I thought maybe once we've started this, we'll hear more about how parents can be better at dealing with teachers, and that teachers can maybe be better dealing with parents. Let's start with Chris.
I had a comment about parents involved in the education of their children. I believe that generally speaking, parents are our most influential teachers or educators. They're with us from the very beginning, and in most cases, and we remember more about what our mother or father did or failed to do, or advised us to do or against, more so than I remember similar advice from the hundreds of teachers whose student I've been. But so I want to make a distinction in our hour today between parental influence on on their children's education versus parental cooperation and engagement with schooling. So that's where two worlds meet. The world of the home and the family are a different kind of a system than the world of schooling. And so an awful lot of the challenging stories and episodes and skills required to make that relationship between the home and the school mutually beneficial or mutually reinforcing involve navigating what amounts to two cultures. And it's tricky. And I'll leave it at that.
You know, you remind me that someone in education had taught me that the parents are who reinforce what the child is learning in school. If what they're learning in school isn't done at home or isn't advocated for at home, then it doesn't stick as much. But if parents reinforce what's being taught in the school and participate in the process, that it sticks better. John?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting topic, and it can go a lot of different directions depending on the questions our producers ask. I mean, we can discuss things like the research behind parental involvement, or how parents can be involved at different age groups, or how teachers can solicit parent support. My personal experience from the teacher side is mostly when I was working in a church setting and I led youth ministry. We were constantly recruiting volunteers. And I think one thing I noticed was a lot of parents, especially of adolescents, thought that they didn't want their kids, or their kids didn't want them there. And the opposite was true. Kids really loved when their parents were involved enough to care. Now, they also, when they were in the same room as their parents, distanced themselves, but they would always look over to see if mom or dad or whomever was there. And there's a whole lot of complexity behind it, depending on, where we end up going with the conversation, but looking forward to it.
Yeah, in that sense, the environment that the school presents for parents to give input can be affected by how the school is administered. Some schools like it more formal, and other ones love to have you just drop in. I've only been a parent for one child, so I was able to focus on that. And one of the key moments for me was there was a grade 3 teacher that my son was with, and they were an expert in teaching math. And they were just wonderful at it. But I was in a position to evaluate that was a really good teacher. Then I went to a parent-child meeting and came down the hallway to find this teacher in the hallway being shouted at by two people. And the two people were unwilling to come into the classroom and learn about what's going on. They just simply showed up to yell at the teacher about how they're treating their son. And I watched this for a long time, and I thought, no, Dave, don't get involved. Don't step up. Just let it go. And she was doing a really good job of handling them and telling them there's other alternatives, and we can talk about this further and help your child. Then they just said, no, we're leaving, and they wandered off. And I thought, well, they had a nice evening. And I went up to the teacher after that, and I just said, you need a hug. John, you posted in Discord a couple of things. Would you like to talk about the research that you discovered there?
Yeah, so I did some research. I used a little bit of ChatGPT to find some peer-reviewed articles. And the fascinating thing about parental involvement in education is I could not find peer-reviewed articles that were also public to be read, hardly at all. So what I did find, I put into Discord. And the big takeaways that I noticed is there's lots and lots of evidence that parents who are involved in their child's schooling, those children have better outcomes. And I think that can lead to a whole complexity of issues depending on, not every parent has the same accessibility to support their children in the same ways. But the fact is, those parents who demonstrate to their children that they care about school, that the parent cares about the child's school, that's the real amplifier, that relationship between the parent and the teacher that leads to improved outcomes for students. And I was really surprised that the most effective things that they did with the different experiments was parents who just asked their kids about school and talked about school. Like, that particular behavior between parents and students was the thing that drove the best outcomes, was just having conversations with kids. And I think it's interesting because it should probably have to be a quality conversation. I don't think they measured that, but there's a big difference between saying like when my kids come home, how was your day? And they say, fine. That's not really a conversation. That's a response.
That's what you get every time.
So what
I've
started doing myself is, instead of saying, how was your day? I say, what was something you learned at school today? And whatever they say based on that, then try to guide that into a conversation, but narrowing the scope of that question from a super open-ended question to a little bit more of a probing question helps with my kids at the age they're at right now, because it gives them a little bit of orientation to that. But yeah, the research shows that any sort of parent involvement is typically helpful, and it can be as simple as just having a conversation with your kid about school.
My father, of 7 children around a table at dinner time, had the basic question, and he did it every night. He said, "What did you learn today?" And we all learned to sort of plan to answer that question, that we would have to kind of remember every day, okay, what did I learn today? And before dinner time, you had a chance to sort of prepare yourself, because you were going to get asked. And if you didn't really have anything to say, okay, you could be forgiven for that. But even on a Saturday or a Sunday, he would say, "What did you learn today?" And I would say something like, I learned how to oil the chain on my bike, or simple things that I was getting involved in. And over time, it became a sort of pattern and practice. Not all my teenage sisters liked talking about that stuff, but then they're teenagers, right? But yes, asking and being involved are two different things. It's probably asking the right questions or showing an interest rather than just a casual, well, did you perform well in school today kind of question. I'm going to push to Chris a little bit here. But I've got Tony on the thing here. So we'll go to Tony first and come back to Chris, because I got a question for him.
By all means, please go to Dr. Clark. I can ask later.
Okay. Dr. Clark, you actually had a response to John's posting in Discord about that research. And you brought up 4 things that I thought were really interesting: charter schools, homeschooling, voucher programs, and online schooling. Did you want to elaborate a little bit on what your thoughts were there?
Well, this is a little bit dangerous territory in a way, because many of those movements and possibilities that have opened up a lot more in the last 20 years since the review that John posted was published are intrinsically political movements, or they have a political dimension to them. And I know that we want to minimize going into those political rabbit holes here on Education Hour and in office hours in general. But the general issue is that before charter schools and vouchers and so forth were as common as they have become, we had basically a public school system and a private school system in the USA. And the private school system was subdivided into a parochial school system run by churches. In scale, the largest system was the Roman Catholic school system in the large cities, mostly in the east of the country, and very expensive private schools. So it was economically limited. But basically, parents didn't have as many choices or options, alternatives to public schooling. Everybody's taxes went to support the public schools, and so it was a challenge to choose a private school where you still pay taxes in support of the public schools, and you're paying tuition to support your child in a private school. So the challenge was, or the tensions had to do with how I think, as a parent, how I think my student is doing or being well served in the school, in the public school that they're in, and can I afford to leave that system for what I would hope would be a better or different alternative that suited my values better. And now or work on trying to change the teacher or change the curriculum or change the way my advocate for my child. And that's where it got into a tense relationship with some parents and some teachers or school principals. So the balance, the tricky balance to strike is between advocacy for your child, your student, and confidence in the expertise and the methods of the professional teachers who are teaching your child. So that's an ongoing tension. It will never be resolved completely. School choice is one of the possibilities. Homeschooling is another. But as the old saying goes, the toughest employer you've got is when you're working for yourself. So homeschooling turns out to be not so much a solution to all your problems, but you take responsibility for all of the challenges that we could otherwise take for granted when a whole public school system is in our service. So it's not always the ideal solution. You bring the challenges as well as the advantages right onto your dining room table. So that's some of my thoughts on the way the world has changed a bit in the last 20 years. Is that there are more alternatives, but there's also more complexity that parents are taking on if they try to take advantage of the multiple alternatives that exist. And then this was highlighted during the COVID lockdown when face-to-face schools were closed, and all of a sudden, in a way, everyone was homeschooling without choosing that or without very much preparation. And every teacher was all of a sudden thrown back into their first year of teaching because very few were ready to do a decent job of online
or even had the supports for it. Yes.
Education. So we had a kind of a natural experiment in how important schools are. And it turned out that schools were more important as childcare centers for children up through adolescence than they were as sources of knowledge and academic achievement. I'll stop there.
All right. Well, it's time to hear from Tony.
I was really wrestling with whether or not I was going to share this or not. So it's actually kind of a conviction story for myself in that this is something that I did to or for my children. And I'll let you be the judge of whether or not this was a good thing or not. So I'm going to use video pencils to sort of describe the scenario.
Sure,
so
go ahead.
This is the county in which I live. Okay, it's a very large county. I live down here in the south of the county. And the thing that I did that I still have some guilt about is that I bused my sons to a school.
How far away was that?
It was 60 miles away in the same county.
So that's a 30-minute bus ride then?
No, it's probably It was probably an hour and a half ride for them going to school every day. They had to get up like almost 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning to get on the bus to ride. And in between is the city of Atlanta.
Well, that explains the time delay. Yes. Okay.
Right. So they had actually literally had to go through the city of Atlanta to get to
school.
The school. So
the choice you were making is it based on the quality of the school or the nature of the instruction?
it was an issue of the resources that the school up here had. And part of the rationale for doing it was that if you think that Tony Mobley is a unique individual or a good person, I would say that he is just your regular Joe who had an opportunity to have exposure to a lot of different things. And because of the experiences that he had, he is the person that you may see now. Whether you like him or not, he is a product of the exposure.
Sure.
And so one of the things that I think that people have to understand.
I'm going to get you to just take that writing on your face and erase it there, if you would. There.
So one of the things that I would say is that people have to understand that probably more so than anything else, it's about what you are able to expose your child to. And it always comes back to economics in terms of what you are actually able to do with your resources.
That's a consideration.
If you're in an economic situation where you are able to provide more resources for your children, then consequently, you are able to do more things that are outside of the norm. Mm-hmm. And I would say to most of us who are having this conversation that most of us here that having this conversation are in the position that we're going to do as much as we can for our children. I don't think that is the norm for most people. So what I would say is that it's important for us to share the things that we have benefited from being a part of this community, having the conversations that we have had in office hours in the education realm by pushing the envelope to share with as many people, regardless to economic situations, about the things and tools that they can use that are a valid resource. It is always about the support that our children get outside of what they get in the classroom. Mm-hmm. How much we are able to invest in them outside of what they get in the classroom is really what it's all about. And if you are a parent, if you're a single parent and with limited resources, you're not going to be able to invest as much in your child. It's just an economic issue. So I said all that to say that it's important for us to think outside of the box in terms of how, and you can tell me whether or not this is even realistic, a realistic point of view or not. How can we help people who may not be in the best economic situation to provide the best support for their children as possible?
That's a serious consideration, yes. And I would say that the majority of people want to do the best for their children. And like you're saying, their means to be able to do that are limited by their circumstances. And anything that the society at large can do, and certainly in some countries, even university education is free in order to level the playing field that way. We have a few questions from our producers. We're going to go to those questions for a while, and maybe we'll come back. But, John, what's our first question?
Our first question comes from Sky Gleason in Seattle, Washington. It seems to be counterproductive to seek parents to participate in their child's education and then label that participation as being a helicopter parent. What is the balance to being partners in learning for today's students?
We'll start with Chris today.
Well, it's a dilemma, Sky. It's not a problem that has a single solution. Basically, the teacher and the parent need to come to a kind of a mutual understanding about what their respective contributions are going to be to the success of the child as a learner and as a participation in the social system of the class or the school, whatever it may be. The language of helicopter parent is pejorative language to discourage and describe a parent who isn't interested in negotiating a balance with the school or with the teacher as to how they will be allowed to or encouraged to support their student or their learner. It's a person who is characterized as too pushy and, in a sense, putting a thumb on the scale in favor of their child in competition or in relation to the other students in that child's class. So it's not so much a matter of bringing out the best in all the students. It's a matter of favoring my son or my daughter, and in ways that could disadvantage everybody else in the class. So that's nobody wants that label. Nobody wants to be in a situation where you're trying to defend the many against the pressure to treat one or some subset of students much more favorably than the others. So it's about balance, and that has to be rebalanced every week with every interaction. Both parties involved, usually a teacher and a parent, need to reassess the balance and say, are we trying too hard here, or should we take some factors into account that the teacher may not be aware of from home, or that the parent may not be aware of, that are going on at the school. So it's more about communication than about remote control.
John, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's really sad that it's become such a contentious relationship and adversarial relationship so many times between parents and teachers. And I think when that happens, we're framing the conversation wrong, and we're using the other group to scapegoat each other. And I think it happens on both sides. Teachers saying, you won't believe this parent, I can't believe this parent, and parents saying, you stupid teacher. And I think what we need to both do on each side of that equation is find ways to make it easy for the other person to do the right thing. And what I mean by that is teachers, make it easy for parents to have those kinds of conversations, and parents volunteer. And I'm not saying volunteer for everything. Do what you can, not what you can't. And not every parent can do the same kind of thing. But what I've experienced as a parent is some teachers, more than others, talk to us, whether it's sending us an email, letting us know how things are going, or their responsiveness when we ask questions. They are specific about what they need from us. And when it's easy for me to know what the teacher needs, I try to help as much as I can. A teacher says, I'm running out of Kleenex, I'll go buy you a case of Kleenex. If nothing else, then to just help you in the classroom. But if the teacher sends me a whole bunch of obligations, I don't even know what to pick from. And so I just kind of, from analysis paralysis, don't do anything at all. So I think it's a little bit of a challenge of almost interface design, is making it easy for people to take the next step. And that's I think the biggest challenge.
I think Sky's question is really good in terms of establishing the degree to which a parent is not just involved, but trying to control the process. And that's the distinction I make, is if a teacher is doing the best and they're following the curriculum and they have the skills, obviously they have their certification and they have the skills, but when it comes to individual children, there are children with special needs. You have to advocate for those, and you have to help the teacher find the resources to support that. So that's a role for any parent who has a child of special concern. But not every child is a genius, and some parents believe their child is a genius and you're not treating them properly, and they want to be helicopter. They want to make sure that they're helping with every aspect of their education. I couldn't see the return on investment there, so I never became one. But I also had a child who was effective. He was participating in school and he liked going there. So I didn't need to helicopter him or try and encourage the teacher to pay attention to them. We have another question. John?
Our next question comes from Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana. What about homeschooling? Is this the best way to have total parental involvement?
Well, Chris, let's follow up with you.
Well, it could be, or it could be the opposite of that. I mean, total parent involvement is certainly part of what you're signing up for when you decide to do homeschooling for one or more of your children. Initially, it was almost a rogue movement, a subset of the deschooling movement that came about. The term, at least, came about in the 1960s and 70s. Now it's become bureaucratized a bit, as I understand it, in that since schooling is mandatory in every state in the USA up through high school, school districts are still engaged in certifying or confirming that homeschooling, a child who is being homeschooled is actually being exposed to the subject matters and the level of subject matters appropriate for their grade if they had been in school. So parents have to certify, and in some cases, states require that students who are being homeschooled also take state achievement tests and so forth. So there's still a back and forth between the home or the parents as teachers and the school system. It's not the same as your child going off to school for 6 hours a day, 180 days a year, but and then there are groups of parents who are homeschoolers who get together and communicate and share resources and take turns offering their expertise. So in a sense, they're these loosely created schools outside of school buildings that consist of groups of homeschooling parents who, in a way, become the faculty of something a little bit larger than a one-family homeschool. So it's become many different things, but certainly the impetus behind the homeschooling movement in all of its forms is that the parents or a parent is really the primary educator and guide for their student, for their child.
In our school board in this district here, we actually have a homeschooling resource center that parents can go to, that they have meetings at, that provide materials, and is the venue for the exams. It's a place where the homeschooling students get to meet each other, and that the parents can form a schooling community and have supports. So that's either a progressive thing or a thing that's going on all over the world. I don't know. Tony?
I really was wrestling with this from the standpoint of looking at the question that Roscoe asked from this point of view. And this is a Tony Mobley definition, and so you can use it or discard it. I think that part of the way in which we need to look at life in terms of educating our children is that there is training, and then there's educating. And I look at training as a way in which you are able to direct your child down a particular path, and they will achieve a certain amount of objectives, and they will facilitate everything that is required of them. They're able to graduate. They are able to do the things that they need to do. They are trained. And then there is educating. And my perspective on educating is that you do the same things that are in the training mode, but you provide an opportunity for creativity and for the child to go beyond those things that are in the box that you are trained. And so I believe that the perspective that we should talk about when we're talking about homeschooling is that homeschooling is not a separate compartment from public education, that your child is a participant in homeschooling when they come home from their public or private school setting, that homeschooling is something that exists on an ongoing basis and is not limited to the days of the week. Homeschooling is the family activity on the weekends or on Sunday or vacation time. Homeschooling is an ongoing thing. And when you are able to provide a homeschooling environment for your child, then you are actually creating a holistic person that is both able to prescribe to do the things that they are required to do, and yet at the same time have a certain amount of creativity.
In terms of the question as I read it, it sort of brings back, as Sky's question did, the idea of control. That I'm not liking what my child is getting from the school that they're going to. I think I can provide them a much richer environment for learning, and all my children will be at home and they'll learn from what I can provide and the resources available to me. In our district, homeschooling is required to follow this same school curriculum, that you're required to teach them the things that the school board and the school system insists every student be exposed to. So there's no difference in that regard, that the homeschooling is schooling. You're talking, I think, Tony, about enhancing what people are learning and giving them other contexts in which to learn for themselves or learn to be lifelong learners. And that school is just the way to start things and become socialized. But there are other things outside of what you call training that prepare us for the outside world and give us the skills and knowledge to proceed normally through it. The reinforcement at home, again, is up to the parent. And the parent has opportunities to expand on the curriculum by bringing non-curriculum things into the fore. So I support you in that regard. But I think Roscoe's question is, the key word that stuck out for me was to have control. And I think that's part of a societal change we're having now. We're more reluctant, I guess, less comfortable handing our children off to other people and letting them influence our children. So this has risen in our society, our Western sort of freedoms, that maybe this is maybe not a good thing all the time. And Some people have real good reasons for wanting to have more control. But I think the reluctance to give control to other people is a key thing in the home and the school environment and the participation of parents. John, our next question.
Our next question comes from Eric Billings in Washington, D.C. To the panel parents, would you rather your children have their current education or the one that you had?
We'll start again with Chris.
I don't think it's a tricky question, Eric, because I don't think it's possible to replicate the education I had today, because the education I had was a product of the culture of the 1950s and 60s. And the culture is very different today, and the opportunities are different. The world is different. So I don't think it's a real choice. I don't think I could replicate. It's not available to replicate my education with my children or now my grandchildren today. I think, though, that my wife and I have shared experiences, remembered, of our educations with our children and now our grandchildren in ways that perhaps integrate some of the big ideas that we have taken with us many, many decades later. So in a sense, they're getting the Cliff Notes version of our stories, of our educations, and the turning points that we experienced, some of which were planned and intentional, and some of which seemed like they were accidental or providential, being at the right place at the right time. Sharing those stories with our children and grandchildren have helped them, I think, compare and contrast the experiences that they're having or that they might have in the future with what it was like in the olden days when we were in school.
Thank you for that. John Snyder.
No, I would not like my kids to have my education. They are both special needs students, and so they are both on IEPs. One has a full-time aide, and if they were just put in the classroom like I was, they would have failed. I also went to one of the lowest rated schools in one of the lowest rated counties in the lowest rated state in the United States for many of my years of, it was basically K through 9th grade. And then I went to one of the highest rated schools, my last 3 years of school in a different country. So different experiences. Every student's different, and contextually, they have different needs. And I would much rather have, when I was in school, had the cool toys we have now, like computers and stuff. So generally, no.
I'm going to applaud your resiliency for being through the less quality school and coming out the way you are today. So good. Tony?
I think Dr. Clark is right in that it is a tricky thing. I have the benefit of graduating from a high school that was a project-based high school. It was a private high school and was project-based. And I would want that experience for my children. However, it was not possible. But I will say that the fact that there are schools that are considering project-based learning, I think it makes all of the difference when you are able to be exposed to, and quite frankly, the things that I was exposed to, I should not have been exposed to based on my geographic location. And I just have to mention that with the project-based education and the sacrifices that my parents made in terms of exposure and not being limited, and I'm going to be transparent and say that the majority of people who lived in my community and looked like me did not have the exposure that I had. I was fortunate in that I was in a project-based learning environment, exposed to so many wonderful things And then I was a part of a house of worship tradition that was always taking us to various places throughout the country to have experiences that were way beyond that setting. And unfortunately, the majority of people who lived in my community did not leave the community. And so, but yes, that's my answer to the question.
I guess my answer to that question would be that my personal experience through school and all the way up to high school, actually, they were constantly experimenting. So every couple of years, things would really radically change. How we were taught math, how the school was structured. We went to a sort of semester system one time, which mystified me. And we had different sort of open classes. Then there was team teaching. It seemed to me that it was constantly evolving. And I've kind of embraced that all things are like that. Even office hours here is constantly evolving. And so the parents can be confused, I think, sometimes when they encounter something the classroom is doing, or the way things are being structured, or whether homework is banned or other things like that. And they're finding it's a little confusing, and they can't see their opportunity to be involved in the education part of things. And as we're kind of conversing right now, there's some responsibility of parents to support what their kids are getting through the curriculum. We'll take the next question then, John.
Our next question comes from Douglas Carmichael. How can parents balance being involved in their children's lives and education with not overly protecting them as they grow?
Protection is a very interesting thing, because we have to look at what the fears are for that protection. And really, there's two aspects. One, are they getting the services they need? Are my child supported? Is my child engaged with other students? Are there issues of isolation? Is the person withdrawing? So those are the protective things that I would focus on. I wouldn't have much concern about protecting them from other kids. I think the school system actually has a lot of mechanics and supports for that. And I think if you're trying to insulate a child from the world outside, then you're doing them some harm. And I think one of the things that I learned early in my own life, and this was from my father, is failure is learning. Where every time you think you can do something and you can't, well, then there's a chance to learn. Or if you thought something was true and it's not, that's a learning opportunity. So it took me many years to, integrate that into my life. But if the child I'm sending to school is not given those kind of guidance and those kind of opportunities to fail, then I'm going to intervene, I think. Yes. John?
Yeah, I think this is a bit more of a parenting question than an education question, but just in general, how people grow. People grow most when their challenge level is slightly higher than their capability model. And just like when you work out, if you push yourself working out, you'll grow stronger. And if you're lazy when you work out, you don't grow as strong. That's how people grow at all ages in all forms, is you need to challenge them and put them in a place where there's some amount of risk, but where if they fail, they won't be devastated, they won't be crushed, and that will keep people out of the fight or flight response, which is a optimal place for growing.
I have an additional little anecdote that I was sitting on a bench watching my child play in a playground just on the weekend. And I was sitting with a parent who was complaining about all the apparatus in the playground and how dangerous it was. And a person could fall here, or they could trip there. And I was kind of thinking, we're in a playground so they can learn that those things exist, that the failure in the playground is through repetition to learn how to swing from the swings or ride on the things that are somewhat dangerous, or go down the slide properly and not hurt yourself. The risks and dangers in life are kind of practiced out in the playground. And this person wanted to cover everything in bubble wrap. And I just was shaking my head quietly that this person doesn't seem to understand what's going on in a playground. The child is learning all the time and experimenting all the time until they get to formal education. So this process of protection and everything can kind of inhibit a person's sense of exploration. So next question.
Roscoe Jones, back from Madison, Indiana, asks, as a professional educator, what's been the best example of parental support and involvement that you've experienced?
Well, as our senior here in education, let's listen from Chris here.
Thank you. I had the privilege of being a researcher on teaching. I was a professor of educational psychology and a member of the Institute for Research on Teaching at Michigan State University during the time when my children were in the East Lansing school system. And my most memorable set of experiences was working as a fellow researcher with half a dozen teachers ranging from elementary school through middle school and high school in schools where my children were students. So the nice part about it, the memorable part about it, was that I was, as a parent, but also as a researcher from the university, I entered into a partnership with these 6 teachers, and together we were making sense of their experiences of teaching, particularly in the field of literacy, written literacy. So it wasn't a focus so much on students or on my children in particular, but it was the development of a mutually respectful relationship between myself and a couple of others who were on my research team and these particular teachers. Each one was making sense of their experience, the invisible parts of teaching, the planning and decision making and sense making and repair of what they consider to be false starts in their teaching of writing at different levels, and also getting them together in a group of professionals who would talk with each other about what it's like to be trying to teach writing to second graders versus high school writers and middle school age kids. So that was, I was in multiple roles as an educator and a researcher, but also as a parent, getting an inside look not only into the schools that my children were enrolled in, but also into the mental lives of the teachers who were, I was very impressed with how thoughtful and how much wrestling with challenging questions the teachers did. But of course, that's usually not available to most parents. It's not even visible to most teachers. But yet it revealed a kind of depth of professionalism that is otherwise underappreciated and underacknowledged.
And John?
Yeah, for me, the best experience I've always had with parental's involvement was those parents who told me clearly and specifically, one, that they wanted to contribute. And they asked, how can I help? They told me what degree they thought they could help. So they would give me ideas of their skills or resources that they were willing to put into our program, including things like I had a parent say, I really want to be involved in my kid's life. I can help 2 to 4 hours a week. Here's some of the skills I think I can contribute. And then as we were talking about events or planning events and that sort of thing, she would always ask herself, what for this event can I uniquely contribute to this event? And she would come to me with a specific idea. And that's really what I needed. And she deferred to me as well and my expertise. So it was always how can I help you in what you're trying to do? Not you're doing this wrong or you need to do this. It was how can I help was the question she was always asking.
Terrific. We have one more question for the hour.
Our last question is from Douglas Carmichael. For parents of older children on the autism spectrum or with related needs, how do you help them develop a sense of long-term inner security and self-esteem while still giving them the support that's appropriate for their challenges?
Well, let's start with Tony this time.
So I think that I'm in a unique position in that I taught high school autism for several years. And also, I have family members who are on the spectrum. And one of the things that I think is important is that autistic adults or students have issues primarily with change. So the way in which I look at wrestling with that issue in particular is that you make their change experience as broad as possible. And my example is that in the case of particularly adults, you provide a broad base of outlets and interactions that can be replicated, but also are broad. By broad, I mean if they are adults that are no longer attending schools, that you provide an outlet for them to be able to either work or have social interactions, and let that be as broad a base as possible. When you have a autistic adult who, let's say, has an aged parent, like I can speak about my nephew, who was primarily the caregiver was my mother-in-law. And it was kind of traumatic for him when my mother-in-law passed. And I had done the best job I could to try to prepare my mother-in-law for her eventual passing by saying to her that it's important for him to have as many outlets and resources as possible so that when she did pass, it would not be as dramatic an experience for him. And so the tools that you want to equip adults with or students with is as much independence as possible, and certainly as many outlets as possible. Now, those outlets, because they don't like change, have to be consistently done. So you're in a position where you are doing a lot of different things all the time. But that is what works for them.
Thank you, Tony. In my own experience, and it's not autism so much as my youngest brother had cerebral palsy and needed supports and helps. There was nothing really wrong with his thinking. It was just his physical disability and some of his difficulties medically that would make going to school difficult for him, and he needed special help. And not all the schools we lived near had those kind of supports. So his experience of education was very frustrating and very difficult. And everyone in the family was, encouraged to support him in anything he wanted to do and try to guide him and protect him and that sort of thing. One of the things we learned from him was we were overprotective, and he wasn't able to express this until midlife, and he lived to 35. So it was around his 20s when he finally stood up to the family and said, "Leave me alone. I'm learning this myself. I'll get my own ideas." And he didn't have the courage to push back on our help until he was old enough to feel confident in himself. And the more we left him alone, the more he blossomed, the more he got involved in things. And he became an advocate for disability. And he spoke in the House of Commons with MPs, advocating for better lifestyle supports for people of any disability, and was in our city anyway, one of the team of people who convinced the city to put wheelchair dips on every street corner sidewalk. And his work just blossomed in the last 10 or 15 years of his life because we left him to his own devices. Having given him the support we did during the early years, gave him the confidence that he could go out and do it himself. And when he did, and we, championed him, he got much better at it, and his life was much happier. Chris, we'll bring it home with you.
Briefly, my sense is that older children on the autism spectrum and with similar neurodiverse qualities all have a strength. And it's different for each person, of course. In fact, all people, all older children have strong suits, so to speak, what they bring to the table, what they contribute to a community, whether it's a school-based community or in the broader community. And I think the way we can be helpful to their development and to their success as a member of a community, which they'll be in one degree or another for all of their lives, is to build on that strength instead of trying to turn these people into generalists who are good at everything, who don't stand out, and so forth. I think being in community can help with that, but of course, particular neurodiverse qualities make being successful in those communities more challenging or require more specific support, both from the individuals whom we're trying to help and also from the adults, say teachers and so forth, community leaders who are managing and leading these community groups. So the idea basically is to be happy with and to support the ways in which these individuals are outstanding, good contributors to the communities that they're members of, and not worry so much about the other 99 ways that they might have been outstanding or contributors. Let's build on the strengths and not worry about trying to stamp out or compensate for the weaknesses.
Thank you. And thanks to everyone for both joining us and being on the panel today. I think this is probably a discussion that I was a little afraid of when I first sort of signed up to host this. But I've heard a lot today that I think gives me things to think about. And I want to thank the people who ask questions, the producers asking questions, guide us and expand the show and give us other ways of contributing. And I want to thank the people in the background who operate office hours and make this look as good as it does and make us sound as good as we do. You can join us next week when we'll open the floor to some brainstorming ideas for future discussions in Education Hour. And I want to remind everyone there's always people in after hours who can help you with technology questions. And maybe there's a few educators out there lurking around in office hours. You can ask them questions too. Stick around today. After this, in just less than 2 hours from now, there'll be a volunteer orientation session in the after hours breakout room for that. And you can easily log into office hours after hours and get into that meeting and see if you too want to volunteer and help us both in the back end and, of course, contributing here on a panel. Thanks, everyone, and you all have a great day. Thanks again, everyone.
Good conversation.
I always find it interesting when I'm participating in this that things I've long ago forgotten get triggered and they come to mind just as someone saying something or a key word goes by and I go, oh yeah, right. Yeah, what? That was when I was 18. I'd learned, that sort of thing. It really is a sort of, I think, Chris, you were joking with me earlier about exercising the mind and being involved in things you don't know about and, keep the brain learning new things and inputting things. So we also I want to thank Harshid for being a loyal member of our panel and being here each week. We really like having you. It's entirely possible he's frozen. So
He's standing super still.
I don't even see him looking around, and he usually does. So, oh, there he is. He's blinking now. Yeah, a little Wi-Fi issue there from.
A little wave, but I was trying to just load up another link. So, yeah.